The situation in Syria has been one of the most complex and devastating conflicts in modern history, involving a brutal civil war, regional rivalries, and international intervention. One of the central figures in this conflict has been Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria. His regime, which has ruled the country for nearly 5 decades, has come under immense pressure in recent years. In this 8-minute overview, we will examine the critical events that have led to the potential end of Assad's rule, as well as the broader implications for Syria, the Middle East, and the international community. Bashar al-Assad took power in 2000, succeeding his father Hafez al-Assad, who had ruled Syria for 30 years. Bashar, initially seen as a reformer, soon turned out to be a staunch authoritarian, maintaining his family's tight grip on power. His regime became known for its human rights abuses, suppression of political opposition, and the use of violence to quell dissent. The Syrian civil war began in 2011, part of the broader Arab Spring movement. Peaceful protests erupted across Syria, calling for democratic reforms. Assad's government responded with violent crackdowns, leading to escalating unrest. What began as peaceful protests soon turned into a full-scale civil war as various factions, including rebel groups, the Syrian Free Army, and Islamist militants, fought against Assad's regime. International involvement soon followed, with countries like Russia and Iran supporting Assad, while the United States and Western powers backed the opposition. The conflict in Syria attracted significant international attention, with foreign powers choosing sides in the war. Russia and Iran, key allies of Assad, provided substantial military and economic support, including airstrikes, ground forces, and weapons. Russian military intervention in 2015 was a turning point, significantly strengthening Assad's position. Moscow's involvement helped him recapture key areas, including Aleppo, the country's largest city, and eventually led to the retaking of much of the country. On the other hand, the United States and its allies supported various rebel groups, although their efforts were often fragmented. At the same time, the US-led coalition also fought against ISIS, which was a major threat in the region. This complicated situation led to shifting alliances, with the Kurdish forces, once US allies, receiving support to combat ISIS but later finding themselves caught between conflicting interests as Turkey viewed them as a threat. The war has had devastating consequences for Syria's population. Over 500,000 people have died, and millions have been displaced, creating one of the largest refugee crises in history. Cities like Aleppo, Homs, and Damascus have been devastated by bombing campaigns, and the country's infrastructure has been severely damaged. Assad's regime has been accused of war crimes, including the use of chemical weapons on civilians. The infamous 2013 chemical attack in Ghouta, which killed hundreds of people, was one of the most egregious incidents, and though it led to international outrage, it did not lead to decisive action from the international community. Initially, the opposition to Assad was fragmented, with numerous rebel factions vying for control. Over the years, however, a more organized opposition emerged, backed by the West, but without much unity or cohesive strategy. Key opposition figures and groups, such as the Syrian National Coalition, found themselves sidelined by local powers, regional rivalries, and disagreements over the future of Syria. In the past few years, the opposition forces, despite receiving support from the West, have struggled to make significant advances, especially after Russia's intervention solidified Assad's control. However, the presence of US troops in the region, particularly in the northeast of Syria, has prevented a complete Assad victory. The Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, also became a key player in resisting Assad's regime, although this has led to tensions with Turkey. As the civil war dragged on, Russia and Iran increasingly shaped the trajectory of the conflict. Russia's airstrikes, along with its diplomatic maneuvering, helped Assad regain control over large parts of the country. Iran, through its proxy forces such as Hezbollah, also played a major role in maintaining Assad's power. However, this growing influence has had long-term implications. The presence of Russian and Iranian forces in Syria has been a source of tension with the West and regional powers like Israel, which has conducted airstrikes against Iranian-backed positions in Syria to prevent a stronger Iranian foothold in the region. In recent years, Assad's position has started to weaken in several ways. While he has regained control over much of Syria, many areas remain either outside his direct control or under foreign influence. The country remains divided, with the US maintaining a military presence in the northeast and Turkey controlling parts of northern Syria. Despite Assad's military victories, his government is financially strained, with Syria's economy in ruins due to years of war and international sanctions. The devastating economic situation and the decline of Assad's ability to govern effectively have led to increasing unrest within the population. Protests and civil disobedience, particularly in the southern parts of the country, have once again started to surface, with citizens expressing discontent over the ongoing crisis. The future of Bashar al-Assad's regime remains uncertain. While he has managed to retain power for more than a decade, the war has left his government weakened, economically crippled, and politically isolated. His ability to fully regain control over the entire country, including areas under US and Turkish control, seems unlikely in the short term. Syria is facing a prolonged period of instability, and while Assad may remain in power for now, the ongoing humanitarian crisis, economic collapse, and fractured state make his regime increasingly untenable. As of 2024, the international community is still divided on how to deal with Assad, with many countries reluctant to re-establish diplomatic ties with him, given his role in the war crimes and human rights abuses during the conflict. The end of Assad's regime would have far-reaching implications for both the Middle East and global politics. It could reshape alliances, particularly with Russia and Iran, and may allow for a new political order in Syria, potentially opening the door for negotiations between the opposition and the government. However, there are also concerns that the fall of Assad could lead to further fragmentation and chaos in Syria, given the complex web of interests involved. In the broader Middle East, the departure of Assad could change the dynamics of the Iran-Syria-Hezbollah axis and alter the balance of power in the region. The US and European countries would likely push for a more democratic transition in Syria, but achieving such an outcome would be incredibly difficult, given the country's deep divisions.